The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the hosts and guests, and not necessarily those of the staff or management of Worldwide Digital Broadcasting Corporation.
And welcome to the Nevada Cannabis News Hour. I'm your host for the day, Perry Haichu, and with me in the studio is my co-host and friend, Mike McAuliffe. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing very well, waiting for this big solar eclipse coming up next week for the world to end.
No doubt, no doubt. It is an exciting time. If you haven't heard, on August 21st, next Monday, here in Las Vegas for you locals, it'll be right around 10 in the morning. We will have a
partial eclipse here.
Unfortunately, we're not going to be in the path of totality, but we will have a partial eclipse of the sun. I think we're going to see somewhere around 70 to 75% totality. The weather says it should be, hopefully, a sunny day. And get out there with your eclipse glasses on safely, of course, and view this wonderful spectacle.
Few in a lifetime opportunity.
Celestial event that's so rare. The Clark County Library System is giving out free glasses until they run out. Your local Lowe's or Home Depot may have the glasses also, so get out there and be safe.
Absolutely. Let's get to the news here. What's happening here in Clark County?
Well, the cannabis stores that are operating recreationally and medically here in the city, depending on which jurisdiction you're in, have various rules concerning hours of operation. And it seems as though a lot of these shops have been victims of burglaries after hours. So one of the solutions that these stores want to explore is to be able to have the ability to be open 24 hours a day if they so choose to be, to give people less of an opportunity to catch them while they're sleeping. So there's a little bit of pushback from some of the regulators, but I think that this is potentially a common sense approach to not only for safety of the product, but for revenue generation, job creation, all that kind of good stuff. I'm having a hard time understanding what the potential downside to having a lot of these shops open is, because they all fall into various zoning. You know, you're not going to be right on top of neighborhoods or anything like that. So, you know, I'm curious to see how this plays out.
Well, I'd also be curious, you might know, are liquor stores in Las Vegas or Clark County 24-hour facilities?
A lot of them are, a lot of them aren't. I think it's up to the business owner to determine
whether... So
it's
a package store and a bar, perhaps, but because I don't go out in the middle of the night looking for liquor, so I wouldn't even know.
Well, but I've never had any problems buying alcohol after hours here in the city, and the package liquor stores that are attached to the pre-existing bars that have those grandfathered licenses, I've never had any problems buying from them either. I've never seen any signage that would lead me to believe that they have restricted hours of operation.
Well, I remember having a conversation with Clark County Business Licensing Director Jackie Holloway a couple of years ago when they were formulating these regulations, and the feeling of the county at that time was that especially at that time, it was patients. It wasn't a rec market, and that legitimate patients are very unlikely to have to run out in the middle of the night to go get their medicine, even though it's a 24-hour town and all that sort of stuff. If there is a sufficient number of hours there, those overnight hours were not going to add much to the community good. And in Clark County, for example, you can operate your medical marijuana facility for 20 hours a day, from 7 a.m. to 3 a.m. And
that seems silly. You have to be closed 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and the reason for it essentially was that the county saw no benefit to patients who would have to run to a dispensary at 4 or 5 in the morning. That it just didn't make sense to them.
I hear you, and that kind of makes sense, but I'll put out a counter argument to that real quick. Las Vegas is a very unique town, more unique than most cities in a lot of ways, but one of the ways that we differ significantly is our hours of operation as a city. Graveyard shifts are a big deal here in town. A third of the city, is up all night long operating these towns, or operating these various businesses. So their sleep schedule, their operation schedule is way out of whack with regular people, and you're doing those potential people a disservice by forcing them to make time to go do
forcing them to think ahead. Since my cardiac surgery last year, I've been on several medications, and the pharmacy that I use is open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And it is no inconvenience for me to say, oh my God, I can't get there in those hours, or even that I know I'm going to run out of my medication, and so I'll go down there to make and get it before that time comes. And it's the same thing with cannabis, I think, for a patient. If they're going to have a strain or two strains that they're using every day, they're going to know when they're getting to the crumbs at the end of the bag. And I can't see that they would need to run out and desperately go to a place in the middle of the night.
No, they don't. For the first time in my life, I ran into a dry liquor law recently. I was on vacation in West Virginia a couple months ago with my grandfather, and I had gone to the various bars, explored the town and things like that. And on Sunday night, the night before we were going to leave to go, I wanted to stop by my favorite bar and have a drink. Bars are closed on Sunday. No alcohol sales on Sunday.
Blue laws.
Yeah. I wasn't, and it's just like I'm sitting there thinking, well, what the hell else am I going to do? And I just, read a book and went to sleep. It's no big deal. And you get around it. You know what I mean? If you know the laws are going to be that way, you just go ahead and prepare it. So it wasn't like a huge inconvenience for me. It didn't ruin my trip or anything that I couldn't go have a beer on Sunday. It's no big deal.
Well, here in Clark County.
But now this is different. This is recreational now.
Now it's
so we don't have to have those patient-based discussions anymore. This is all about consumers, and this is all about tax revenue.
It is, but what you had said at the top of the story here essentially was that one of the reasons that these businesses are looking to have a 24-hour cycle is because most of the places that are getting burglarized in those 4 hours that the place is closed.
That would be my argument.
And so that's fine, but if you do think that's a problem, then without having to go to the expense of opening in a 4-hour time slot that you're going to probably be doing very little business anyway, wouldn't it be more economical just to hire a security guard to sit in there on that shift?
Yes, it would be, but that should be the business owner's decision, not the county forcing them to make that decision. If the business owner wants to be open 24 hours a day and they think they can sustain that through the revenue they're getting, then that should be their call.
Yes, I understand that, but the county has already put restrictions on other industries on hours of operation when they're licensed, such as the massage industry, which is a lightly regulated industry in this town.
I understand that, but
and so many of those places cannot be open in those overnight hours. For
sure. Well, I kind of, I kind of have mixed feelings.
It's a thorny issue
concerning that specific industry, because there's kind of like a taboo idea that a lot of these girls are, in the sex industry, and it's like the old rub and tug and things like that, and that's kind of the idea, is that by the county saying that the massage parlors cannot operate during certain hours, they're kind of insinuating that there's criminal activity going on at that business. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so concerned about it. And that's disturbing, because they're also, in my opinion, throwing that same gauntlet down at the cannabis industry and kind of lopping them in with that by
a sin industry, as it were.
Yeah, and it's just like, we need... we'll work toward eroding that perception as best we can by just conducting business safely and appropriately, and hoping to change minds.
Yep.
But
we'll see what happens. Meanwhile,
hold on. There's a little something else here. Well, they're trying to regulate delivery services also, which is a whole separate thing. I'm sure that will work itself out eventually. These alcohol distributors will get their little teams together and start delivering cannabis, and whatever, that's fine. But the thing that we're talking about here that I really wanted to focus on real quick are the drop boxes at McCarran Airport that they're trying to encourage. They want you to drop your weed in the little drop box before you go through the TSA checkpoint.
And that doesn't mean you're going to get it back out of the drop box.
No,
when
you're
you
definitely
come
not
back.
going to get out of it. No, but I always try to fly with weed, and if they give me shit, I stand my ground.
We should absolutely suggest to the county that those drop boxes become more like a take a penny, leave a penny box for the tourists.
That's funny. Well, I was just going to say what happens to what they don't say is what happens to the to the cannabis after, they're just probably going to throw it the hell away.
Yeah, I'm sure they're going to destroy it. At that same Green Ribbon panel meeting that these items were discussed, the advisory panel also asked the county to take a look at the legality of pot consumption lounges. And this is from an article in The Sun on Friday the 11th of August by April Corbin. And Ms. Corbin writes that the Green Ribbon panel, which is, of course, an advisory board to the county consisting of representatives from the gaming, resort, marijuana, and retail industries, recommended that the county staff ask its attorneys to interpret existing federal guidelines as to see whether they will allow for the introduction of marijuana consumption lounges. Existing state laws are ambiguous and open to interpretation. I love those ambiguous laws. Such lounges would give visitors a place to legally smoke or consume their cannabis, which is something that the industry officials say is badly needed. Now, Nevada Resort Association President Virginia Valentine, who used to be the a big muckety-muck in the Clark County government, and I forget her position. She called the current predicament crazy. She said, yes, we're open for business and you can buy it, but you can't use it, you can't consume it. And, you know, that's a problem that we've talked about on the show any number of times.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about this constantly, and it's not going anywhere.
No, it really isn't. And in part it's because people are constantly trying to drag the feet of progress on this and slow things down. And Mr. Tony Alamo, who is the chairman of the Nevada Gaming Control Commission, stressed that gaming and pot is going to be separate. He said, never the two shall meet. But what's really got me out of this article here is that he later added the intent of question 2, which voters approved last November to legalize recreational cannabis, was to allow Nevadans to smoke and not tourists coming in from other places.
That was not the legislative intent of the bill at all.
He said
all people over the age of 21 with
yes,
ID from
absolutely.
all over the world, every single person.
Well, Mr. Alamo says, and I quote, somewhere along the way it went afoul and we started talking about tourism. That wasn't the ballot initiative. And
that's bullshit.
He's absolutely correct that the ballot initiative did not mention tourism.
Didn't need to.
It said, you know, over 21. You know, so it does adults, right? It doesn't mean that they have to be necessarily from Nevada. The idea that Mr. Alamo suggests that the legalization initiative passed last year is good for Nevadans, and Nevadans can smoke, but only if they hide in their homes, but anybody else cannot. It's almost as if he was saying that these people are still, the tourists coming in that are doing this are still illegal and you know, perhaps deserve to be focused on by law enforcement. You always said
it's like cowboys versus hippies mentality here in Las Vegas. They hate the dope and they hate the dopers, and they're going to do whatever they can to squash that as best they can. And really, people like Mr. Alamo, the chairman of the Nevada Gaming Control Commission, are bad for business in the state of Nevada. They shouldn't be representing and, you know, they shouldn't be in a position to where they can do harm to our tourist market willingly, maliciously.
I don't know how someone gets appointed to that position.
It's a governor-appointed position. The whole, absolutely. And Sandoval's been terrible with these appointments for the Gaming Commission. It's not just, like I was telling you before the show, it's not just the MGMs and the Boyd Gamings that are slowing, that are hurting business here. Mm-hmm. It's the Gaming Commission themselves that are making it difficult for gaming corporations to get clarity on any number of policies concerning either what machines they can bring to the floor in a timely manner or what they're supposed to do with this new, not a new, but a pre-existing demographic of customers. Mm-hmm. that it seems as though the commission that's tasked with protecting the industry is trying to shoo away an all-cash business, you know, fastest growing all-cash business in the country.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of disheartening to know that these regulators are so adamantly against something that's so safe.
But also because the Nevada Gaming Control Commission is very cognizant of the fact that gaming is to some degree a federal oversight area, and they're worried about anything that will conflate gambling and drugs.
Like they are, but they aren't. Like there's no National Gaming Commission.
No.
The Gaming Commission is a self-regulated industry, almost entirely the industry. The Nevada Gaming Control Board has insanely strict standards that they implement upon themselves, and that's why the feds have never done that. And that's why when we were looking to craft marijuana regulations, they wanted to implement that same kind of structure so that they could self-regulate the cannabis industry. And now you have this gaming industry trying to stick their goddamn nose in the regulatory process, saying, oh, well, we don't want this. Or, well, what the hell do you care?
Yep.
We're trying to put butts in your seats.
Yep. Well, I agree that there's something of an overreach here by the Gaming Commission on this, and it is largely a self-regulating industry. Of course, the U.S. Constitution says in the Ninth Amendment that those powers not expressly delegated to the federal government remain in the hands of the states. And I'm paraphrasing. And so what happens here is when you have a state like Nevada taking gaming regulations or cannabis regulations and start to craft them out and really fulfill that responsibility of oversight, they are, in a legal term, occupying field, and they're not giving room for the federal government to come in. And so even though the Gaming Commission is a self-regulating industry, it's not, or a self-regulating industry commission, it's not something that the industry votes on who to put in charge there. It's still the governor who is doing it. So there's still an official control going on there. One other point I'd like to make on this story, though, is that Mr. Alamo questioned whether voters who supported Question 2 would support public consumption lounges or any of the accoutrements that the expanding local marijuana industry is now trying to make a reality. And to that, I would say, Mr. Alamo, of course the voters would support it. When the voters voted for this 55 to 45, they were voting for cannabis to be regulated and treated the way alcohol and tobacco are. They are looking.
That's the rumor.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so, of course, they would support public consumption lounges. That is part of the whole legalization regulation process.
I used this example a couple weeks ago, and I'll use it again. I really feel like the common sense measures can be taken when you're looking at this regulatorily. Is that even a word? But anyway,
close enough.
Yeah. Street racing and skateboarding used to be considered public nuisances / criminal activity, etc. And it got to the point to where architects started incorporating design features in their blueprints to discourage skateboarders from tearing up their little plazas. Banks put in knobs on their little benches and all kinds of crap to discourage it. Now, that all basically went away when the counties and cities started saying, well, let's just build skate parks.
Yes.
And kids started congregating there. I mean, why wouldn't you go somewhere that's built specifically for you?
Indeed. Indeed. And
drag racing, same thing. You don't give people a place to go, they're going to do it everywhere. Same thing with cannabis. You don't give people a place to go, they're going to do it everywhere. You give people a place to go, and they will go there. Say, if you build it, they will come.
Yes.
I guarantee if you had a little, a room this size of the studio right here in every, hotel casino where you could go safely medicate before you hit the casino floor or whatever.
It'd be packed.
It'd be packed every single day, and you wouldn't have people out on the floor doing their thing. And besides that, you would take away the excuses. You would take away that ability for people to say, oh, well, I have to do this over here because there's nowhere for me to go. You take away those excuses, and it's just all a good thing. But once again, common sense isn't so common these days, and it definitely does not rule the day.
That's for sure. Well, common sense says we have to pay the bills, so we're going to take a quick break.
Put her hand in mine and said she loved me so very long ago.
Hey, how's it going? You can just throw your name up on the list and we'll get right to you. Yeah, thanks, dude. Thanks for coming in. Let me just clean this spot up and then we'll get right to you. You can hop on up if you're ready. Welcome to the shop. You need a shave too, though, right?
I don't know if I would accept a shave from somebody who's unshaven.
I look like a child when I have a clean-shaven face.
No, I wouldn't want a child cutting my hair. And I'd also need to know that the blades have been sanitized thoroughly.
I can guarantee you that the barbicide is 100% authentic, and these are sanitized tools I'm using.
Well, what is the...
Have you ever gotten a straight razor shave?
Is there any other kind? stuff smells like Irish Spring.
Brings me back to childhood.
Did you grow up in a chemical plant? Hurry up.
Yeah, well, Now you look like $1 million.
Well, that's your job. I'll be sure and mention your facility during my show tonight.
You're coming to shoot in Las Vegas. There's nowhere else like it. You're going to need a few things. That's where Got Films has got you. Crew, got it. Equipment, got it. Creative, got it. Locations, got it. Experts in all things filming Las Vegas, got it. This isn't a game. This isn't a trick. This is your production, your reputation, and your money on the line. Got Films has got your back, front, and everything in between. Got Films. Got it?
And welcome back to the Nevada Cannabis News Hour. We have a couple of stories here on legal issues that I really feel are kind of important for you guys out there in the intertube land to know about. The first comes from a website called Lexology.com, released on August 10th. It says, another victory for medical marijuana at work. And it begins that on August 8th of this year, a federal district court judge in Connecticut concluded that federal law does not preempt a Connecticut state statute that prohibits employers from firing or refusing to hire someone who uses marijuana, medical marijuana, for medicinal purposes. And that basically means that there is no federal preemption, that state licensed businesses cannot use the federal government Controlled Substances Act to deny employment.
It's because the federal government doesn't have employment standards of any kind.
Exactly.
Or they don't implement employment standards.
Mm-hmm. In this particular case, called SSC Niantic Operating Company LLC, Knopfsinger versus SSC, that is. In this case, a nursing home rescinded a candidate's job offer as a director of recreational therapy after she tested positive for marijuana use in a pre-employment drug screening, even though she provided evidence that her use was medicinal and she had been prescribed cannabis to help treat PTSD. The nursing home filed a motion to dismiss in her case, arguing that Connecticut law was preempted by several federal laws, including the Controlled Substances Act, which makes it a federal crime to use, possess, or distribute marijuana. The court rejected these arguments that the CSA preempts the Connecticut law on the ground that the CSA does not make it illegal to employ a marijuana user, and in fact does not purport to regulate employment practices in any manner. Yeah, this is a
it's
big
a huge
thing.
Deal.
Especially if you're going out there for a job and you get denied on this, because this is not the first case to come along this way. This is, a matter of fact, the second one in the last several weeks that affirms this kind of decision. The court also rejected as an argument that by the nursing home that it was exempt from the Connecticut law because it was subject to federal regulations as a nursing home. Right. They're
medical facility.
Exactly. And the court abruptly dismissed this argument, commenting that it borders on the absurd. That's a direct quote, stating that the act of merely hiring a medical marijuana user does not itself violate the CSA or any other law.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For Christ's sake, some actual
common sense
reason.
Well, we do have common sense coming from there are a lot of learned and very thoughtful people on various state benches throughout the country, and this is a good decision, I think, and it's something that if you're out there in the workforce, you ought to tick this one away, in one of the back corners of your mind, because if you ever run into this kind of situation, the law is absolutely on your side, so keep aware of that. The other story that I'd like to talk about for a little bit on this comes out of the LA Times, and Joel Rubin is the reporter, and the article is entitled, "The Feds Seized Guns, Gold, and 320 pot plants. So why did a judge rule that they can't pursue marijuana charges?" And it's a longish story, and it's it begins saying that when federal agents from the DEA raided a remote farm in Humboldt County, of course, 5 years ago, they found plenty to incriminate the owners. They had more than 300 pot plants. They had about $225,000 in cash, much of it bundled in vacuum-sealed pouches, hidden in a garage and some pickup trucks. And later, searches uncovered another large stack of cash along with bars of gold and silver. These guys knew what they were doing.
No doubt.
You know, and we're not going to name these guys because we're not into naming and shaming drug defendants in this show. But in a ruling believed to be in the first of its kind, a judge last week put a stop to the case before the men were sentenced. Now, they had already pled guilty on this, but their attorney, I don't know how he managed it, for well over a year, managed to delay sentencing, delay it, to see how things would get implemented here. And the judge ruled that in ruling this, put a stop to the case before these guys were sentenced. The judge found
this
that
is a federal magistrate.
Yes, the judge found he had no choice but to call off the prosecutors in light of an unusual budget rule that in Congress that forbids law enforcement from interfering with states where medical marijuana is legal. And this is something that
they were found in compliance with 320 plants.
Yes, well, and what happened? The Hinchy-Rohrbacher amendment precluded the DEA, or the Department of Justice, under which the DEA is a part, precludes them from spending any dollars in the investigation or prosecution of cannabis crimes by people who are working lawfully within the state.
Right, but they have to be working lawfully within the constructs of
or
the
at least
state
have
law.
reasonable doubt that they were doing so. The government would have had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt here. And so the decision by U.S. District Judge Richard Seaborg in San Francisco illustrates for the first time what could be a serious legal hurdle if U.S. Attorney Jeff Sessions, who is obviously a fierce opponent on this, decides to crack down on medical marijuana, which remains illegal under federal law. While it remains to be seen how many other marijuana cases will be closed down like this one in San Francisco, supporters of state's authority to legalize pot hailed the decision and said they hoped that it could serve as a check to Sessions. And this is the intent of Congress here. Congress decided going back to 2014 that they were not going to allow the Department of Justice to be wasting money on these cases in these states where a regulatory structure was already in place. So for these guys, they already have pled guilty to this, but now the judge has stopped any sentencing because, according to the amendment, not $1 can be spent in the prosecutor's office going after that.
So does that mean they get their stuff back?
No, because they've still pled guilty, so they're going to be subject to asset forfeiture, and they're going to have a criminal record because they pled guilty, but the judge is enjoining the prosecutors from moving forward to the next phase, which would be the sentencing phase.
Who gives a shit about all that? They didn't go to jail. That's what really matters.
That's a really important thing here. Though brief, this amendment was meant to have a significant effect. It forbade the Department of Justice from using funds in any way that obstructed a state from implementing their own state laws that authorize the use, distribution, possession, or cultivation of medical marijuana. And Congress, since this amendment was first added to the spending bills, Congress has reauthorized it every single year. And as we reported on the show a couple of months ago, in May, Attorney General Sessions asked Congress not to include this provision in the next spending bill, and Congress thumbed their nose at him essentially and put it right in there. The judge agreed with the defense attorneys here, and when the spending rule, which passed with broad bipartisan support, by the way, became law, Richard said he sent emails to the public defenders and other defense attorneys across the country to alert them to the new legal avenue the amendment opened in marijuana cases. So there's a lot going on with this case, and ultimately this is what Congress was intending here, and is preventing overzealous prosecutors from going out and screwing with people who are doing their best to work within compliance of state laws. So I think a case like this is once again another great step forward for the movement.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Setting case precedent for future patriots.
Yeah. Last year, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the defendants in California and other states in the court's jurisdiction were entitled to a hearing to determine whether they had been in compliance with those state laws. If defendants, and this is not just this one case, so the Ninth Circuit is ruling that anybody in the five-ish states, I think, that this circuit has, that any pot defendants have the right to go and show that they were being medical marijuana providers, users, whatever, and that they would have a legal right to have these cases halted right at whatever point they're at.
File appeal.
I guess you would have to. The defendants could if the defendants could demonstrate they were complying with state rules, the prosecutors were going to be blocked from pursuing federal drug charges. So on Tuesday, this judge wound up agreeing with the defendants in this case, saying that the men were under that the defendants themselves were under no burden to verify that all the members of their collective were qualified to belong. He acknowledged that the money and weapons could be signs of a criminal operation, but that they were equally consistent with the operation of a rural, cash-intensive enterprise. And
the burden is on the prosecution.
Absolutely, because these guys had said in their defense that they had the guns because they were in a rural area and they needed to protect against mountain lions, bears, this and that and everything. And is it a stretch? I don't know. Maybe I don't live up in that area, but it does not.
Most of the mountain lion attacks in the country happen in California. It's not completely out of the realm of possibility.
Not at all. And so they bring up what's called reasonable doubt. And if you have reasonable doubt, you can't be convicted in a criminal trial, at least according to the precepts of our Constitution.
Right.
So it will be interesting to see what happens here. This doesn't, to your earlier point, this ruling does not in any way address what happens to people who have been post-convicted, post-sentencing, because at that point they're already in the system. And you bring up an interesting point, because the Bureau of Prisons does operate under the general umbrella of the Department of Justice, and so if an incarcerated defendant could make a legitimate demonstration that they were operating within the guidelines of their state law, then in theory they shouldn't be able to spend any more dollars on their incarceration.
Excuse me. Let's discuss for a moment the fact that a disproportionate amount of the defendants who may be incarcerated currently were disallowed from using medical marijuana as a defense in the first place. The judge, oh, you can't use that because it's against federal law. Now we have the exact opposite happening. These people were denied their ability, in my opinion, to have a real defense. They were denied their constitutional right to a real reasonable defense, because they weren't even allowed to present their case. It was a real, I think, a kangaroo court, I think is what they call that.
And indeed, this is what happened with all the defendants in the federal cases that happened as a result of the September 2010 raids. They were all prevented from bringing up medical marijuana in any of these defenses, and which is why they all wound up taking pleas. Well,
so by that regard, you know, the government cuts the legs out from under you, throws you in prison, and now this is the answer to that. So basically, what this means, this would be not an appeal to dismiss. This would be grounds for a new trial and the reintroduction of said evidence, correct?
No, this would actually be grounds for someone who's incarcerated, if they could actually prove that they were there under state-authorized medical marijuana. I think they could make a successful challenge to the Department of Justice that they need to be released immediately, because the department is enjoined from spending any money on going after these crimes. So if you're incarcerating someone, you are spending money.
All the way back to 2014?
Yes. All the way, right. But I actually saw another statistic a couple of days ago that since 2012, when the states first began legalizing cannabis with Colorado and Washington first, that federal marijuana trafficking prosecutions have dropped in half. They've gone from about 6,600 down to about 3,300. So the federal government is already backing off this, and it'll be interesting to see where this goes. Hey, we're going to have to take another quick break. We'll be right back.
Crazy Terry here with your car care tip of the day. So it's not a bad idea every now and then to check your battery. If you don't know how to do it, have somebody check it for you. Just a visual inspection can tell you a lot about your battery. So as we can see here, this battery's got a hold down. It's nice and tight. The cables are on. They don't look bad. We've got a cover. We don't see any corrosion. Everything's kind of tight, looking good. A little bit of dirt, that's normal, but nothing's leaking. No real cause for alarm here. So that's a good sign. Doesn't mean it's good, but at least visually we know that it's intact. Okay, so we're looking at a battery here that shows signs of corrosion. We want to test that battery to make sure it's good. Usually when they're getting like this, there's going to be a problem, leaking some acid at the top. We ran the test and we find out it has 396 cold cranking amps, but the battery requires 650. So it's just not enough. The battery is going to go soon. Better to know now than later. Okay, so the benefits of checking the cable is because this cable's rotted out. What we'll find is this is the problem, not the battery. So it'll save you from buying a battery, still having the no start, only to find out that it's a cable. This type of corrosion is common in diesels. Okay, so we're getting ready to jump the car, but we have to have some battery cables. And we have to check those too before we hook them up to the battery. So here we have our standard set of battery cables. We just look them over, see if the ends are frayed, if everything's connected all right. Everything looks good here. Wouldn't hurt to check the rest of the cable just to make sure the dog didn't get it and chew it up. We have red and black. Red's positive, black's negative. You always want to hook the positive up first and then the negative. And I'll show you how that's done right now. Keep these off to the side so they're not touching each other. Hook up your positive. You can find that right here by the plus sign, the negative sign. Plus is positive, red. Make sure that's securely hooked up. Keeping these away from each other. Hook up your negative cable. Just got to fight it on there. Figure out a way to get it. Wiggle it a little bit so it ensures a good connection. Now you're transferring voltage. If I hit these two together, we're going to spark. Kind of want to avoid that. Won't kill you. Kind of fun. A lot of people think if they can turn the headlights on, the battery's fine. That's not always the case. It takes very little amperage to turn a light on, but it takes a lot of amperage to start the starter. I recommend checking the charging system every oil change. At Sun Valley Automotive, there's never a charge for that. This is Crazy Terry with your car care tip of the day.
And welcome back to the Nevada Cannabis News Hour. Looking a little beyond Nevada here, we have to a border state. We have interesting things happening in Oregon.
Very interesting. A lot of conservatives I don't think will like this, but I think if you're a real conservative, like a real true libertarian, you got to be shouting for joy at this. Oregon, the governor of Oregon, Governor Kate Brown, signed a bill that makes personal use possession of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and all other recreational drugs a misdemeanor, not a felony. Oregon joined just a handful of other United States and defelonizing groups under the new law, which was supported by law enforcement groups and takes effect immediately. Among the bill supporters were Oregon Association Chief of Police and the Oregon State Sheriff's Association, which said felony convictions include unintended consequences, including barriers to housing and employment.
Wow, that's some pretty forward thinking coming from law enforcement types, and I don't mean to denigrate law enforcement there, but in general, they tend to be much more conservative, hard line. This actually demonstrates that there's an understanding of the outsized hardship penalties. If somebody gets a felony, you may serve a year in prison, you may be put on probation, whatever, but that felony stays with you forever.
Jobs
and ever.
Jobs, loans, everything. You get burned on everything.
Absolutely.
And, this really gives people the opportunity to turn their life around in a meaningful way. And if you're just going to start issuing misdemeanors, hopefully they're going to start issuing things like drug court rehab and instead of prison time for people who need the help to get their head straight.
Well, if you recall during the 2012 primaries, Ron Paul at one of the debates had said to an audience in South Carolina, if heroin were legalized tomorrow, I don't think anybody in this room would run out and buy and start using heroin.
No.
But essentially we should not ruin people's lives over a bad personal choice. And so it is a very libertarian view, and I certainly don't suggest anyone go out and do any of these drugs. I think some of them are really terrible and horrible. But at the same time, taking someone who has that kind of drug problem and then throwing them in jail and ruining their opportunities, therefore moving forward in life, it's just way outsized.
To separate dangerous people from society because we've determined that they no longer can function within the confines of society. If our standard for that is having something in your pocket when you're not hurting someone else, that's a problem for me.
Right. It's way too many people that you're messing up with this, and I would point out with this law signed by Governor Brown, and that's interesting. You have Oregon and California, both Governor Browns, both Democrats. I wonder if it's a takeover by the Brown family. But anyway, what the governor is doing here is reducing harm, but at the same time, people who were convicted of these felony charges prior to the passage of this law are not going to have their records removed or expunged or anything like that. This is a moving forward, but it is a great step.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Now we're going to jump across the ocean to Hawaii, and they recently had their first their first medical marijuana dispensary open on Oahu, which is the most inhabited of the islands. There's about 1 million people on Oahu, and Aloha Green Holdings Incorporated sold out its initial stock of cannabis by the end of its third day in business after several hundred consumers flocked to Oahu's first medical marijuana dispensary. The dispensary said it could not keep up with demand at the interstate building at wherever the hell it is, and it consistently long lines and wait times of 1.5 hours. The store will be closed until 11 a.m. on Wednesday to replenish product strains.
So this is something that the Nevada dispensaries were all worried about, especially with the distribution method up in the air, but it did not happen. These entrepreneurs in Nevada made sure they had enough pot to last, whereas in Hawaii they just and you would think Hawaii is a place that they grow a lot of pot out there. It's an ideal climate for it.
Sure.
You would think they would have had plenty of it there, but even with all that available on the various islands, they still sold out really fast.
That's a good problem to have. They're doing brisk business, and I can't wait to see what kind of wonderful strains and genetics come out of Hawaii. So
they are indeed. Okay, we're almost out of time here, but I did want to talk about something really quickly. We have seen in the past few days. We have seen a dark side of America come out with the demonstrations and counter demonstrations in Charlottesville, Virginia, and just really the worst side of America, I think, is showing its face there. Yet these two, the groups, the alt-right groups, the neo-Nazis, all that sort of stuff are hearkening back to a time that most Americans have forgotten about, because very few of us alive right now were alive fighting fascism in the 1940s, in World War II. And I'm sure you recall when World War II started, it was as a result of Germany invading Poland, and the France and Britain declared war on Germany at that point, and it started this whole conflagration coming. And where I'm coming to on this is just last week this is released on the 9th of August from marijuanapolitics.com. Polish President Andrzej Duda signed into law last month a measure which will allow the production and sale of medical cannabis to qualified patients.
Oh, wow. How about that?
How about that? Poland's governing legislative body passed the bill earlier in the spring with a tremendous vote of support, voting 440 in favor to only 2 votes opposed to allow this medical marijuana program to go forward in Poland. And And the reason that I bring this up is because just a few months earlier, we had seen that in Germany, the Reichsbund actually passed medical marijuana legislation in Germany. So now we've got all this stuff going on with neo-Nazis and the guys on the right, doing their whole thing. But meanwhile, one of the countries that was the quintessential founder of that philosophy and its immediate target have both embraced cannabis as a common sense solution to a lot of medical issues and medical needs. And so, if former, I don't want to say former Nazis, no, because I'm not trying to paint the whole country there. But you've got these former opponents on this who are coming together for a common good, which is taking care of their citizens, allowing their sick citizens to get help that they need. And if you can have governments on both sides of that historical conflict coming together, surely we in America can come together here. What's going on across the country with the resurgence of this neo-Nazism and the failure of our administration to condemn it immediately, it just blows my mind. And it's something that I think that we all need to take a little time to step up and say, not in my country.
Yeah, well, we had 8 years of the other side, so this is the response to that.
It is. And I'm not trying to get into a big argument and turn this into political directions, but we're all here for such a short time. We should really try to work together a little more. And I don't see that the heartland of America is going to let us get taken over and become a whites-only, right-wing, fascist-type government. I just don't see the great middle of America letting that happen. And so the quicker we can quell that kind of extremism, I think the better it is for all of us. So that's my little rant for the moment. And,
no doubt. And I guess we're about out of time. So
and I guess we are.
With that, we'll see you next week.
See you next time.